as you know, you're seeking the National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, and people want to know what you bring to the job if you get elected as National Chief. And we've come up with some questions we'd like you to answer, and hope that the viewers and the people who are listening in will understand your point of view. And what we're trying to do is put these questions on the national scope. And the first question is, what do you think about a general election where all citizens eligible to vote for the national chief?
Well, a general election is a huge undertaking. The Assembly of First Nations had a renewal proposal a while back, which meant they looked at the AFN and were determining what changes to make. And one of the things they looked at is whether or not there should be one person, one vote. And at that time, they determined that it wasn't feasible because it cost so much money. And I don't remember the exact amount, something to the effect of $3 to $4 million if they were going to do that. So every 3 years it would cost that kind of money. It is actually possible if they got into an arrangement where they had the financing to do it. So that was one of the things. The other thing is that AFN is not a government per se. So you're not really voting for your government leader. You're voting for a political spokesperson that's there with a particular mandate that's not really inherent. It's not a position that somebody comes there with authority. People put that person in place as an advocacy and an office that coordinates and brings people together. So that's the other thing. But I think the other reality is that this is 2012. It might not cost that much because you could have it all computerized, and it's possible to actually do it for a lesser amount. And I think we should talk about it. We should talk about where we want the AFN to go. What would it mean if every person had the opportunity to vote? So I think we need to be open to that.
Mm-hmm. We want to hear your views on the federal government's budget's implementation, the Bill C-38. What do you think about that?
Well, this is a very scary time for everyone in a country called Canada. I think the general public should be somewhat frightened because they've lost control of this government. And I say that because the federal government they call themselves conservatives, but we know they're really not conservatives. They're a mixture of reform and other personalities that are there, and they're way to the right. They're way to the right. And if there's going to be some sense to this, they need to be brought to the center, where the public and the people in this country are. They don't have to go so much to the left, I don't think, but they need to be brought to the center so that what they're doing is of reason and makes sense to people. So that's not going to happen unless the public gets organized, and especially if and only when we get organized. We're the ones that are going to bring them over here. Now, C-38, we had a presentation on it today by the MP from the Western Arctic, Dennis Bevington, and what he said was 75 pieces of legislation are being affected. That is incredibly huge. Never has there been such a way of dealing with issues in the country. And part of what I mean by that is members of Parliament were contained in their discussions. They could not speak out very much. The committees were condensed. There was very little debate, and this was rammed through. And we're told this is just the beginning, because in the fall there's going to be another huge omnibus. And what that means is this country, as I say, is in trouble because the government has a plan, and the plan doesn't come from the people. It's from a small amount of people. It's a handful of people. essentially the cabinet, working with industry, and they're just pushing to do whatever they want.
Mhm. How will this impact Aboriginal and treaty rights, and in particular with land and natural resources?
Well, in my view, and I think the view of our people, strictly legally speaking, this doesn't apply to us because we've got this whole body of law under Section 35, and we've got these constitutional protections under Section 35. The difficulty is to enact them, and that's the move that we have to work on. And what we're talking about here in the Denny Assembly is to go to the Supreme Court to insist that they force Canada to enact our rights, our laws, so that we are not affected. What I'm actually saying is that what they're doing in Parliament is not applicable to us, because that's their government, it's not ours. And the Section 35, this is where we are. This is where we are. And 91 powers that the federal government has is over here. 92, where the provinces are over there. And that's what we need to understand. And we need to insist that when Canada talks about us, they have to have the authority to do that. Because in most instances, they don't. We've never given them that authority, and that's the relationship that needs to be cleared up. In January, there was some discussion on that, but it didn't nearly go as far as it ought to.
Mm-hmm. Chief Erasmus, what do you think, how do you feel about the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People as being a representation of what Section 35 is of the 1982 Constitution Act?
Well, the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People is a wonderful document. It took 20 odd years to develop, and now it's being recognized internationally by all countries, by all states. And what that means is that not only for us in Canada are our rights Constitution protected, then they're beyond. They're globally endorsed. And so what that means is that what our elders have been talking about all the time is in fact correct. Our elders are right. They didn't give up their lands. They didn't give up their resources. The treaties were of peace and friendship. And again, the fact that it's at the international level is very good, because this body can monitor Canada and insist that they go by the rule of law, because the rule of law also supports us. And Canada now has a problem with that, and that's why they don't want to go to the UN. They don't want to support this, but they're caught in the middle, and the public has to insist, and we have to insist, and if we continue doing that, we're going to be okay.
Mm-hmm. Now, language is a big issue all over the place, or right across the country, and do you think that the government should provide appropriate resources so that Aboriginal languages are protected, so that the culture and customs are carried on to the next generation?
Well, the whole issue of funding is one where we as governments, we with the protected rights that I talk about, we're independent people, we're sovereign people. We never gave up anything to anyone else. So what that means is financially we also have the capability. The problem is, again, that hasn't been sorted out. So we need to deal with that. One big thing, for example, when the Canadian government looks at its budget, it's like a pie. A huge chunk of it is set aside for us because of this special connection, because of this special situation. We don't know where the heck that money goes. That's the problem. There's a huge amount of money. It's for health, it's for education, it's for housing, and other necessities. Big deal of that money goes to the federal government. Big deal of that money goes to the province. Big deal of that money goes to the territorial government. By the time it gets to us, very little. And there's no accountability on this side. So we need to clear that up, first of all. And then we need to determine exactly how to deal with this whole issue of lands and resources. If we never extinguished, if we never surrendered, if we were never defeated in war, and we're here as independent people, then we need to deal with this country, and we need to have our fair share so that we can function as a stable entity in the country.
Mm-hmm. Now, Chief Erasmus, over the years, the Supreme Court of Canada has voted in favor of some of the issues regarding Aboriginal people.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking of cases like Delgamu, for example. Do you think that the federal and provincial governments respect those decisions?
Well, I think the federal and provincial governments respect them. They respect them, but their legal departments, their justice departments, will find every way possible to get out of them, to get away from enacting. And that's been the problem. There's a legacy and there's a mindset. It's one of apartheid, it's one of genocide, it's one of oppression, where the apology of 2008, for example, made it very clear what they did was wrong. What they did was harmful, and it should never happen again. Okay? That was not only with our schools, it was with every other facet of our lives. They tried to completely eradicate the Indian. They tried to get rid of us. They didn't only try to kill the Indian and the child, they tried to get rid of the Indian. They tried to kill us off, but they didn't, and they couldn't, and they never will. So, what do? You have to work together. The apology talks about having a partnership, and that's what we need to focus on. So, I think the fact that there's a whole doctrine of law, if you look at Vanderpeet's another decision, and it's significant in there because Vanderpeet says there's a doctrine of Aboriginal and treaty rights. That's very, very significant because what it means is that we're just not talking. You know, these treaties are valid. The fact that we're original peoples occupying our lands and organized societies, having a royal proclamation that says we are nations, that we have title. Anyone coming onto our lands, if we don't have a treaty, then people just can't come in. And if they do come in and they molest our lands, that's the kind of language they use, then they can be reprimanded. That's the law. And we need to have that enacted. Mm-hmm. So I think the provinces and the feds respect them, but they're not taking that next step. And that's where we need to come in. Let's take that next step so that we, in fact, can be recognized and we are the people that are able to function as we're supposed to in this society today.
National Chief, thank you for taking the time to answer some of these questions and listening to the public, and I hope that you a lot of success at the AFN election. If listeners would like to get more information, please go to www.votebilly.com or on Facebook at www.facebook.com/votebillyerasmus for AFN 2012 or follow Twitter at votebilly. Donation from supporters can be made at Chief Erasmus's website. Remember, as Chief Erasmus would say, speak out. Mussy.
Yes, mussy, and make sure that everyone does speak out. If we don't, it's very difficult to move forward in a good way. Mussy.